and they were covered in giant, hairy spiders.
You call that a scary story?
I couldn't stock bananas at the grocery store if you paid me $1 million.
Let me tell you a real scary story. 3 little words. Denial of service.
Oh, you mean DDoS? I've heard of that.
No, not DDoS, and please stop putting rocks in your mouth. A pale man sits atop his sleek gamer chair throne, leading his hardcore guild to a world-first boss kill. Adorned in kitty ear headphones and a sunken face that stares beyond his screen to a life he could someday have, if only. But none of that matters now. He's peaked. Soon he'll be lauded as a hero, as the man who did what no one else. Hello?
Blizzard have been pandering to the normies for too long, Jeremy. This the council cannot abide.
No, God, please no.
They have been denied service.
What? What?
The horror.
It's okay, little guy, they can't hurt you here. Well, unless...
Please, please, tell me everything there is to know. I don't want to die in World of Warcraft.
Denial of service or DOS attacks have precisely one goal, that is to compromise the availability of an application. Today we're covering denial of service from many angles, including why so many easily exploitable ones persist in the wild, how to think outside the box in order to develop novel attacks, the concept of timing window stretching as it ties together DOS, race conditions, and timing attacks, and a methodology for discovering and reporting these vulns. We think everyone from beginner to expert will find something to sink their teeth into here, so get ready because we're diving deep into DOS. Wait. First things first, we need to clear up a common misconception. Despite the cultural zeitgeist that is the notion of the DDoS, not all denial of service attacks are distributed. A denial of service attack becomes distributed denial of service when the actual attack is performed by many individual devices. There are nearly as many ways to categorize denial of service attacks as there are ways to perform them. You could segment them by layer of the OSI model, such as Layer 7 application, Layer 4 transport, Layer 3 network, but this leaves those without a strong grasp of the model with a lack of intuitive understanding. A more palatable way to partition them is by method used to achieve impact. I'll split these into 3 categories. The first class here will be known as a bomb. These types of DOS exploit some flaw in application or infrastructure logic, wherein a one-time request or burst of requests is enough to completely sever the availability of the application to its users. Billion Laughs is a classic attack which allows an attacker to exponentially grow variable references by stacking assignments. This causes the parser to reserve all the RAM on the device, starving any other application that must allocate RAM from working until the parser has died and the memory has been freed. Another example is a simple validation error. Say the site asks you for your age as a number, but the devs never expected you to put in ABC. When the site tries to calculate your age plus 10, the application errors out and the site might become unreachable. Our second category of DOS here will be dubbed a trickle attack. Tools like Slow Loris fill up the allowed connections for HTTP servers, slowly dripping chunked headers but never quite finishing the requests. This causes users to be unable to connect to the site at all, as the server is already at connection capacity. Other cases, like the segment hole attack found in Sockstress, exploit issues in the kernel in order to force the victim's machine to allocate multiple memory pages to each connection. Much like the Billion Laughs attack, threat actors starve the system of resources required to begin and complete processes. Finally, we have the most notorious kind of attack, a flood attack. Attacks like OpenDNS resolver reflection use the fact that responses from these resolvers can be very large compared to the size of the request sent, something like 20 to 30 times. If an attack spoofs its source IP in the request to these open DNS resolvers, the resolvers can be convinced that they are talking to a victim. They will then send amplified traffic to the victim in response to the attacker's spoofed requests. These attacks will qualify as DDoS because although they originate from a single source, which bounces requests off many resolvers, these distributed resolvers end up sending the actual data to the server, which causes damage. This even occasionally happens with no intermediary devices, just the attacker and the victim. Say for example, a site offers a paste bin that allows you to upload large amounts of text, which is then validated on a single thread. If an attacker can constantly queue requests that will take an inordinate amount of time to validate, they can flood this weak system with enough traffic to make it effectively unusable. The mitigations for many of these attacks come down to infrastructure. While there are mitigations like black hole routing and network diffusion, these still only function if your network hardware can physically handle the throughput. This is where services like Cloudflare, who offer DDoS protection, carve their niche. You may know them as the whimsical company that has a 24-hour video stream of their lava lamps from which they source their entropy. But that hasn't been generating the ad revenue they were expecting, so instead they built a billion-dollar hosting platform with a supposed 388 terabyte per second network throughput. They offer to stand in front of any network traffic a site will receive to manage load balancing, rerouting, connection restriction, and various other services to ensure that internet-facing software is configured to be secure. These solutions can be quite powerful for mitigating some types of flood attacks and have made tremendous leaps in progress in just the last decade. So too has the rest of the world, far from the days of old where any 15-year-old could grab your IP from a P2P application and point a network stressor at it to knock you offline. Unfortunately, this does nothing for mitigating the vast majority of DOS attacks, which are what we will focus on in the rest of the video. In the world of bug bounty, DOS is criminally overlooked, heavily stigmatized, and virtually always out of scope. But why? Shouldn't we have the good guys trying to find things before the bad guys do? Unfortunately, this limitation arises out of necessity. When DOS testing is allowed broadly, some handful of hooligans inevitably pelt the server with harmless traffic, which clogs up logs and makes finding real threats more difficult. Or worse, they loose genuinely harmful attacks without any concept of what will result. A surefire way to get a knock at the door from a 3-letter agency. And even when researchers know what they're doing, mistakes still happen. Underestimating the impact of a vulnerability during response time testing, where even an extra single character breaks the boundary between slowing the server down for a few seconds and requiring a hard reset, can lead to some pretty catastrophic results. Don't ask us how we know. Beyond simply finding these vulnerabilities, confirming and quantifying their impact walks a fine line. This necessarily entails compromising the availability of some part of an application, at least for a moment. In rare cases, the vulnerable software on the server is available to the researcher, to be spun up locally and confirm issues without disrupting the production application. However, in the vast majority of cases, there's simply no ethical way to test for DOS, let alone one that can bring about financial benefits. Which, sure, that's okay, there's plenty of other vulnerabilities to find in every application. But a lack of use for this knowledge eventually turns into a lack of circulation of this knowledge in our community altogether. And when we turn our heads to knowledge that we perceive as taboo, we tend to overlook the value of the information when applied with nuance. So, I challenge you. Let your preconceptions of denial of service fall away as we now take our first step into the topics that generally aren't covered when it comes to this conversation.
I'm a dead man, cause I'm chasing money till I drop. I'm a bread man, stacking up this money till I clock. I'm a businessman, I'll take the consultation.
In that vein, let's forget all the types of DOS that we just went over and deliberately try to imagine some alternative ways that you could compromise the availability of an application. One angle you could take here is to aim for specific users instead of the entire site. Johnny is ecstatic to have created his new social media website. Drunk on his own confidence, he believes there's no way hackers will be able to ever brute force his accounts because he set the accounts to lock for 24 hours after 5 failed password attempts. Good luck hacking that. Yet along slinks a hacker with a grudge. He's recently been banned from the website for sharing hacked content and thus violating their terms of service. He resolves himself to cause some damage. After all, if he can't use his account, why should he let anyone else use theirs? He begins by collecting the usernames of the top 100 most popular members on this social media website. He then sends enough incorrect login attempts to each username to cause each account to lock out. Mr. Hacker has effectively removed the availability of Johnny's website to all 100 of these users for the next 24 hours. Our organization has encountered countless variations of this in the wild. You could translate this targeted DOS from an account to a specific functionality on the website by moving your sites to the supply chain. Johnny has now created another website, one that serves companionship to the lonely masses in the form of AI girlfriends. Johnny's website interfaces with an API. He's purchased a certain number of tokens which are consumed by the API when generating text. He's planned carefully and found that his user base doesn't generally exceed more than 5 million tokens used per month, which he has budgeted for accordingly. Johnny limits each account to 1,000 free tokens, and any more must be paid for. But little does he know, this is not enough to protect him. Mr. Hacker writes a script that creates new accounts on Johnny's website, immediately using all available free tokens. With 5,000 botted users, he can consume these 5 million tokens completely, denying the poor fellows who constitute Johnny's user base their AI HUDs. Some of you with a bit of knowledge on machine learning may be thinking, if Johnny had hosted his models locally, he couldn't be rate limited by the API like that. If run locally, he could generate text ad infinitum, given he has enough power and a beefy enough device to run the model. But this simply moves the ceiling of impact from the token limit Johnny has purchased to full bankruptcy via his power bill. Take another step back and you'll realize that you don't have to target an application at all to achieve denial of service. Financial denial of service, aka denial of wallet, is a category of denial of service that occurs from increasing the operating expenses of services such that they are no longer sustainable. This applies to any app functionality with costly computational overhead, but the prevalence of AI-centric applications shines here like a red flare across a jet black sky. You could even use his site against his users and their service providers. For example, mail bombing is an exploit enabled by a majority of sites in the wild. If an attacker can supply a victim email when creating a new account, often the website will send an email with a confirmation token or verification link. In most of these cases, the server will send as many emails as you can create accounts, and even when they're rate limited, race conditions never cease to hide in the cracks, enabling the behavior regardless. If emails sent are larger than the requests the attacker sends, this can be used as a form of amplification, not only for flooding weak SMTP servers, but also for flooding the emails of users, or simply spamming until the SMTP server sending these emails is blacklisted by service providers. And we haven't even touched a grain of sand in the desert of creative variation here. From social engineering your way into shutting down a connection to physically traveling or mailing things to a crucial operating facility, denial of service has many a gaping maw to stare into. But once again, dear viewer, I want to take this further into esoterica, where other security research topics overlap when distilling these exploits to their quintessence. There's something about time. Something subtle. It moves forward inexorably. Or at least it appears to. But what if time itself could fold? When we speak of denial of service, we think of floods, overwhelming, relentless. It roars like a bustling street after a sudden gunshot. But what if the strings that tie the world together were the same strings used to asphyxiate it? A weapon hidden in plain sight. An inescapable force that cradles the world in its embrace. In the quiet spaces, that's where the cracks appear. Nah, I'm just playing. Your video's loading fine. But seriously, take a bird's eye view of this topic with me for a moment. Distill traditional denial of service attacks to their most basic principle. Time. Upon receiving a request, the server takes some number of actions before sending a response. For each action, there exists some window of time where the application is actively working to complete that action. We will oh so creatively name this the timing window. Denial of service is about stretching out these timing windows as far as you possibly can. But that begs the question, if we have control over the size of the timing window, could we not decide exactly how much to stretch the window? Here we must examine other vulnerability classes that can leverage this concept of timing window stretching. The two we will cover here are race conditions, where we abuse application timings to change the sequence of operations, and timing attacks, where we use time responses to recover hidden information. For our examples, we will use our friend from before, the ever so enterprising Johnny. He's created a new website for his online shop, where he sells NFTs ease of his own quotes. Shoppers can use a discount code to get a lower price on the items they buy. Inside his server, when a shopper tries to redeem a discount, his code runs the following instructions. The server checks a flag called discount used to determine whether a discount has already been used on the card. The server then validates all the text that will be reflected on the new receipt, such as the shopper's account name via poorly written regular expression. Once the receipt text has been generated, the server sets the discount used flag to true and updates the card accordingly. Knowing this, our attacker attempts to send a barrage of simultaneous requests resulting in multiple discounts via TOC-TOU. If you're unfamiliar with TOC-TOU race conditions, check out our previous video on FoxyCard for an explanation. However, our attacker finds that he's limited in the amount of requests he can slip through at once to around 5, because the timing window between the time of check and time of use is only a half second at most. What Mr. Attacker doesn't know is that he can employ a technique used in denial of service attacks to turn this slightly larger discount into infinite free stuff. By crafting a malicious account name, Johnny's poorly written regular expression will have to backtrack many times during the validation, stretching the timing window arbitrarily. This type of attack is generally used to stretch the timing window into a full denial of service attack, known as DDOS. But Mr. Attacker can use this to stretch the timing window as far as he wants, thus getting as many discounts as he wants. Johnny is fed up with all the hacking. He's done. And as all professional developers know, there's only one way to deal with the technical debt of an insecure codebase, so his new website is called Blackmailer, where you can post your most incriminating secrets onto a blockchain and sell them to the highest bidder. And this time, he knows there won't be any funny business. He's built every single thing from scratch, from the HTTP server to the site authentication. Unfortunately, his login function uses a naive comparison operator. Little does Johnny know, those are optimized to return false as soon as a character mismatch is found. So, where the password is ABCD, an input of AB will have a larger timing window than any other 2-character combination. An input of ABC will have a larger timing window than any other 3-character combination, and so on. This technique that can be used to steal information such as passwords is known as a timing attack. While they have been historically considered a hypothetical vuln that isn't practical in the wild, the reason comes down to losing the timing window in the noise. In an ideal environment, say on the same physical machine, these microsecond level differences are obvious. In practice, however, real networks introduce jitter, random variation in latency caused by routing, queuing, congestion, and system load. That jitter can easily be larger than the timing windows we're trying to measure, making it extremely difficult to tell what is a valid input taking longer and what is an invalid input that had more jitter than an average request. So, what's a modern attacker to do? In the past, attackers would have to send tens or hundreds of thousands of requests and use statistical analysis to detect variations all the way down to 10 microseconds. But in 2020, security researchers discovered and published a better way. The paper that described these techniques originally is titled Timeless Timing Attacks. By abusing a handful of implementation details in HTTP2, such as multiplexing and encapsulation, attackers can collect multiple requests into a single package to ensure that the server will begin executing all of them at the same time, effectively removing network jitter entirely. These timeless timing attacks have been used to detect variances as low as 10 nanoseconds in lab environments and 200 nanoseconds in the wild. There's still a roadblock here, however, because although the server will send responses back in the exact order it finishes them, TCP is still a stream protocol and thus prefers to receive the responses in the order that it sent the requests in. This is known as the sticky request order problem and is once again addressed by timing window stretching. Researchers in the original paper included large parameters in the first request in order to slow them down and compensate for TCP's sticky ordering, so that the order the attacker receives the responses in matches the order that the server sent its responses in. In the words of His Majesty Sir James Kettle,
a denial of service is just a really easy timing attack.
And now, the true timing window of each input is clearly distinguishable, and thus, Mr. Attacker can steal the password of every user on Johnny's website, character by character. Now, here's something we want to emphasize heavily before we get into the testing methodology. If you aren't given permission and you can't spin up an acceptable copy of the environment, do not attempt to hunt for DOS. Additionally, you should always be aware of your nation's laws before attempting to engage live targets, and in almost every case, successfully landing a DOS attack without permission comes with a harsh punishment. That said, we will now outline a methodology that we have compiled as a starting point to discover and report denial of service exploits. I will skip over any mention of existing tools because frankly that's uninteresting and something that anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together has probably tried already. Instead, the intent is to lay out a set of questions where the answer drives you to the website's weak spots. Firstly, is the server single-threaded or running synchronously? Servers where only one response can be generated at a time have a much lower threshold of load required to completely compromise availability. Does the server have outdated software, weak hardware, or limited resources? Servers with unoptimized software and hardware can have the same problem of being easily overwhelmed. CVEs are obviously an auto-win. Do synchronous operations block request threads? Operations like file writes may be done synchronously or use thread locks, which can be abused to temporarily disable server concurrency. Can the async job queue or worker pool be exhausted via repeated job creation? This one is more general. What you're getting at here is software-imposed limitations that may reduce the required load to take the server offline before the hardware limitations are actually met. Are there any endpoints that generate large responses? File exports, image or video generation, and use of locally hosted ML models may introduce large CPU, RAM, and persistent memory load depending on implementations. Specifically, this one is pointing towards functionalities with a mostly fixed-size timing window that happens to be large and thus requires a trickle or flood type attack to be useful. Involve CPU-heavy logic? Sorting, parsing, or search queries in particular, in contrast to the previous point, have functionalities that could easily scale the computational cost based on the kinds of inputs the user gives to achieve a bomb attack. Allow large file uploads, media storage, or log large inputs? If you can compromise via computational overhead, maybe memory overhead will work. Trigger deep recursion or nesting, or use a non-streaming parser. Same idea as the one before last, but this is a specific call out for XML, JSON, or zip bombs. Call third-party APIs that may time out, rate limit, consume use tokens, or blacklist clients. While this can sort of apply to any API, specifically AI-centric websites are going to have this everywhere. Use caching to reduce response times and which values are used as cache keys. Caches can hide the true response times of endpoints, so it's important to use a cache buster or techniques like fatgit in order to get around caching and see the real response times. Do endpoints that perform intensive operations have missing or weak rate limiting and CAPTCHAs? This is just doing the most basic recon to see if flood attacks are viable. Are account lockouts applied to brute force attempts? Most sites do, and if they don't, brute force is completely viable. If accounts lock out for more than a few minutes, this becomes abusable as DOS. Do endpoints involved in modification of the password or other credentials use predictable authentication mechanisms or inconsistent enforcement? The point we're getting at here is, while you may not view impacts like account takeover as denial of service, that is a secondary effect of those types of impacts, and thus looking for vulnerabilities such as insecure direct object references, broken object level authorization, and plain weak auth bypass mechanisms like verb tampering or JWT attacks is still important when looking for denial of service. Are there any endpoints that may amplify inputs? Some very common examples of this include verification emails on account signups or 2FA messages on account sign-ins. For example, if you can sign up using someone else's phone number and you're not required to use the 2FA to create the account, you log in and it sends you a 2FA message. Now you can spam their cell phone with text messages called SMS bombing. Are there any token, session, or other expensive auth-based validation mechanisms? This is a more general call out to be creative and don't throw away unconventional attack surfaces. Flooding with invalid Java Web Tokens, for example, can be effective as signature verification is very expensive. How is rate limiting done if it exists? Is it IP-based, account-based, or session-based? This can tell you about the feasibility of bypass methods like botting and proxy rotation. Are there any other vulnerabilities which might not have had impact which can be chained into denial of service? Limited forms of cache poisoning could store error pages, turning a regular home page into a 404 for every user that sees it. RCE could call sleep or use expensive operations. XSS could force users off the sites by setting window.location. Cross-site request forgery could force the user to delete their account, etc. Don't forget about other vulnerabilities and how they can be used to achieve denial of service. With that, this video draws to a close. If you appreciate the work that went into the research and editing here and you want to support us so we can continue making content and hacking shit, give us a like and tell us what you learned or what you would add to this topic in a comment below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe because as always, we're ethically setting the internet on fire and showing you guys where the kerosene went, so who doesn't love that? Stay vigilant. See you soon.